The haunting melody carried across the dusty main street of Willow Creek, causing passersby to stop and stare at the slender figure draped in black who stood beside the newly erected headstone in the cemetery on the hill. It was the summer of 1878, and Olivia Anderson's voice rose and fell like a wounded bird as she sang a mournful hymn for her departed husband, tears streaming unchecked down her pale cheeks. "Would someone shut that caterwauling woman up?" growled Thaddeus Moore, the town banker, as he covered his ears dramatically. "Been 3 weeks since they put Thomas in the ground, and she's still carrying on like it happened yesterday." Several townsfolk had gathered at the edge of the cemetery, their expressions ranging from annoyance to cruel amusement. Olivia seemed not to notice them, lost in her grief and the lyrics of the song her mother had taught her as a child. It had become her daily ritual since the fever had taken Thomas, leaving her alone in their small homestead just outside of town. "Sounds like a dying cat," snickered one of the younger men. "Maybe we ought to throw a boot at her, like we do when those strays start yowling at night." Their laughter was cut short by the appearance of a tall stranger who had been watching silently from the shadow of a cottonwood tree. His features were weathered by sun and wind, his eyes the clear blue of a high mountain lake. Dust covered his clothes, suggesting he'd ridden far, and the gun at his hip showed signs of regular use. "That's the sweetest sound I've heard in 300 miles of hard riding," the stranger said, his voice quiet but carrying a steel edge that made the group of mockers step back. A man might consider it a blessing to hear such a voice before meeting his maker. Xander Fairfield had not intended to stop in Willow Creek. The small Colorado town was just another dot on the map, a place to rest his horse and replenish supplies before continuing north. But the voice had caught him, wrapped around his heart like gentle fingers, and pulled him toward the cemetery where Olivia Anderson poured her grief into the afternoon air. The townspeople dispersed under his steady gaze, muttering excuses and avoiding eye contact with the formidable stranger. Xander leaned against the fence, respectfully removing his hat as Olivia finished her song. Only when the final note faded did she become aware of his presence, startling slightly as she turned to find him watching her. "I apologize if I frightened you, madam," he said, keeping his distance. "I only wanted to say that your singing touched something in me. It's been a long while since I heard anything so pure." Olivia wiped hastily at her tears, embarrassment coloring her cheeks. At 26, she was younger than most widows in town, and the past 3 weeks had hollowed her out, leaving dark circles beneath her deep brown eyes. "They think I've lost my mind," she said softly, gesturing toward town. "Perhaps I have. Thomas always loved to hear me sing. Now he's gone, and sometimes I think my voice is the only thing that might reach him, wherever he is." Xander nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Grief finds its own path, madam. No one has the right to judge how you walk it." She studied him, noting the trail dust and the weariness in his stance. "You're passing through?" "Yes, madam. Heading up to Wyoming Territory. Got some business there." "Well, Mr. Fairfield, Xander Fairfield. Mr. Fairfield, thank you for your kindness. It's been in short supply lately." She gathered her shawl around her shoulders. "The town's only boarding house is full up with railroad men. But if you need a place to rest, I have a spare room. My husband built our home with the intention of filling it with children, but—" her voice faltered. "It sits too empty now." Xander hesitated, aware of how such an arrangement might appear to the already judgmental townsfolk. Yet the exhaustion of the trail pulled at him, and something in Olivia Anderson's dignified grief stirred his protective instincts. "I wouldn't want to cause you any trouble with your neighbors, Mrs. Anderson. They already think I'm a mad woman singing to ghosts," she replied with a hint of defiance. "What's one more reason for them to gossip? Besides, my home is a quarter-mile outside town. No one need know." Xander found himself accepting her offer, leading his horse as they walked away from the cemetery. The summer sun beat down mercilessly, and Olivia explained that her husband had been a carpenter who'd come west 5 years earlier, with her following a year later, once he'd established himself. They'd been married for just 4 years when the fever took him. "He built everything in our house with his own hands," she said proudly. "Said a man should create something that outlasts him." As they crested a small rise, Xander saw the homestead nestled against a backdrop of pines. It was modest but well crafted, with a small barn and corral to one side. A stream ran nearby, explaining why Thomas Anderson had chosen this spot to build his dream. "It's a fine place," Xander said honestly. "Your husband had skill." "The best in 3 counties," she agreed, unlocking the front door. People came from as far as Denver to commission his work. Inside, the house was immaculate, though Xander couldn't help noticing the layer of dust on Thomas's woodworking tools. Visible through an open workshop door, Olivia showed him to a small but comfortable bedroom, then excused herself to prepare a meal. Later, as they sat at the kitchen table sharing a simple supper of stew and cornbread, Xander found himself watching the way the lamplight played across Olivia's features. Grief had not diminished her beauty, though it had added shadows beneath her cheekbones and a certain guardedness to her expressions. "May I ask what business takes you to Wyoming, Mr. Fairfield?" she inquired, breaking a silence that had stretched comfortably between them. Xander considered his answer carefully. At 32, he'd spent the last decade moving from place to place, taking whatever work suited a man with his particular skills. "I've been hired to help a rancher with some troubles he's having." "You're a lawman?" she asked, noting the way he carried his gun with the ease of familiarity. "Used to be. Now I'm just a man who solves problems for people willing to pay." He met her gaze directly. "I don't take jobs that go against my conscience, Mrs. Anderson." She nodded, seeming to accept his explanation. "How long will you stay in Willow Creek?" "Just long enough to rest my horse and myself. 2 days, perhaps." He paused, then added, "Though I'd consider it a privilege to hear you sing again before I leave." The request brought a flush to her cheeks, but also a small, genuine smile, the first he'd seen from her. "People around here don't appreciate my singing much." "Then they're fools with cotton in their ears," he replied firmly. That night, lying in the comfortable bed in Thomas Anderson's spare room, Xander listened to the distant sounds of Olivia moving about the house. Once, he thought he heard the soft strains of a lullaby, barely audible, as if she were singing to herself while completing her evening tasks. The sound brought an unexpected ache to his chest, reminding him of how long it had been since he'd stayed anywhere that felt like a home. Morning brought the scent of coffee and bacon, and Xander found Olivia already dressed and busy in the kitchen. She'd pulled her dark hair back in a simple knot, and her black morning dress was accented only by a small cameo at her throat. "I hope you slept well," she said, placing a plate before him as he sat down. "Better than I have in months," he admitted. "You're kind to share your home with a stranger, Mrs. Anderson. After your defense of me yesterday, you hardly seem a stranger." She poured coffee for both of them. "And please, call me Olivia. Mrs. Anderson reminds me too much of Thomas's mother, who never approved of me." They shared a smile at that, and Xander felt something shift between them, a tentative bridge forming across the gulf of their separate circumstances. "What will you do today?" she asked as they finished breakfast. "Need to see the blacksmith about my horse's shoe, pick up some supplies. Then I thought I might help you with any repairs needed around here, as payment for your hospitality." Olivia started to protest, but then reconsidered. "The barn roof has been leaking, and I haven't had the heart to fix it. Thomas was going to see to it before." She trailed off, then straightened her shoulders. "I would appreciate the help, Mr. Fairfield." "Xander," he corrected gently. "If I'm to call you Olivia, seems only fair." After breakfast, Xander rode into town, aware of the curious glances that followed him as he tied his horse outside the general store. Small towns had a way of noticing outsiders, and he had no doubt the shopkeeper would question him thoroughly. Sure enough, Elmer Perkins, a balding man with suspicious eyes, watched Xander like a hawk as he gathered supplies. "Passing through, are you?" he asked, not bothering with pleasantries. "For a day or two," Xander replied, adding coffee and sugar to his purchases. "Staying where, if you don't mind my asking? Boarding house is full up." Xander met the man's gaze steadily. "Found accommodation just outside town." Perkins' eyes narrowed slightly. "Only place outside town is the Anderson place, and that widow woman ain't likely to take in boarders. Mrs. Anderson has kindly offered me use of her spare room in exchange for some repairs around her property," Xander said, his tone making it clear he considered the matter closed. The shopkeeper sniffed disapprovingly. "Town's been talking about her strange behavior. Singing at that grave every day, neglecting her responsibilities. Some folks think she might need to be looked after, if you take my meaning. Xander's hand stilled on the counter. Mrs. Anderson strikes me as perfectly capable of managing her affairs. She's grieving, not deranged. Well, just so you know, Sheriff Patterson keeps a close eye on strangers in our town, Perkins warned, totaling Xander's purchases, especially those who take up with vulnerable women. I'll bear that in mind, Xander replied coldly, paying for his supplies and exiting the store before his temper got the better of him. The blacksmith proved more agreeable, focusing on Xander's horse rather than his business. By midday, Xander had completed his errands and was heading back to Olivia's homestead, a bundle of roofing supplies tied behind his saddle. He found Olivia in her garden, kneeling among rows of vegetables, her hands deep in the soil. She looked up at his approach, shading her eyes against the sun. "I see you survived your encounter with our town's welcoming committee," she said with a wry smile. Xander dismounted, leading his horse to the water trough. Word travels fast. In Willow Creek, gossip is the primary industry. She stood, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I imagine Elmer Perkins had plenty to say about the widow Anderson taking in a strange man." "Nothing worth repeating," Xander assured her, unloading the roofing supplies. "I got what we need for the barn. Thought I'd get started right away." Olivia watched him work throughout the afternoon, occasionally bringing him water or offering assistance. The summer heat made the task grueling, but Xander found satisfaction in the physical labor. By sundown, he had repaired the worst of the leaks and reinforced several weakened beams. Over supper, Olivia seemed more animated than the previous evening, asking about Xander's travels and sharing stories of her life before coming west. Born in Boston to a music teacher mother and a father who worked as a printer, she had grown up surrounded by books and music. "Thomas courted me for 2 years before convincing me to marry him," she explained. "My parents thought I was mad to follow him to Colorado Territory, but I couldn't imagine life without him." Her voice caught slightly. "Now I'm learning to imagine just that." "It takes courage," Xander said quietly. "More courage than most men who face guns and fists." Olivia studied him curiously. "You speak as if you know something of loss." Xander nodded, his eyes distant. "My wife and daughter died of cholera in '68. Ellie was 23. Our Emma was just 4. Olivia reached across the table, her fingers lightly touching his hand. "I'm so sorry, Xander." "It was a long time ago," he said, though they both knew such wounds never fully healed. "After that, I couldn't stay in one place. Took the badge for a while, then drifted into this line of work." "And the job in Wyoming?" she asked gently. "A rancher named Caldwell has lost cattle to rustlers. Local law hasn't been able to help, so he's bringing in outside assistance." Xander paused. "It's straightforward work, but it pays well." Later that evening, as they sat on the porch watching fireflies rise from the tall grass, Olivia surprised him by singing. It wasn't the mournful hymn from the cemetery, but a gentler tune, one that spoke of hope amid sorrow. Her voice, clear and strong, filled the gathering darkness with something that made Xander's chest tighten. When she finished, he remained silent for a long moment. "Thank you," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. Olivia nodded, understanding in her eyes. Sometimes music says what words cannot. They parted for the night with a new awareness between them, a recognition of shared pain, but also of the possibility that grief need not be the final chapter of their stories. The next morning brought a knock at Olivia's door. Sheriff Patterson, a barrel-chested man with a graying mustache, stood on the porch, his expression stern beneath his hat brim. "Mrs. Anderson," he said, nodding curtly, "I understand you've taken in a boarder." Olivia straightened her shoulders. "Mr. Fairfield is staying temporarily while he assists with some repairs, Sheriff. I wasn't aware I needed the town's permission to have a guest in my home." Patterson's eyes shifted to Xander, who had appeared in the doorway behind her. "Just looking out for the welfare of our citizens, madam, especially those recently bereaved." "I appreciate the concern," she replied coolly, "but it's unnecessary." The sheriff addressed Xander directly. "Perkins mentioned you're headed to Wyoming, to the Caldwell spread?" Xander nodded. "That's right. Heard they're having trouble up there. Rustlers, they say, though some think it's more complicated." Patterson fingered his badge thoughtfully. "Just so we understand each other, Fairfield, I run a peaceful town. Don't want any gunplay or trouble while you're here. I'm not looking for either, Xander assured him. Just passing through. After the sheriff departed, Olivia turned to Xander with troubled eyes. He's never shown such concern for my welfare before. In fact, he was among those who thought my daily visits to Thomas's grave were excessive. It's not you he's concerned about, Xander said grimly. My reputation sometimes precedes me. Is there something I should know? She asked, searching his face. Xander sighed, leading her back inside. The last job I took was in Arizona Territory. A mining company was using strong-arm tactics to force smaller claims out of business. I was hired to protect one of the independent miners. He paused. It got ugly. 3 men died before it was over. Olivia absorbed this, her expression thoughtful rather than fearful. Were you defending yourself and your employer? Yes, he said simply. She nodded. Then you did what was necessary. I may be a widow who sings to her dead husband, but I'm not naive about the realities of the frontier. Her acceptance eased something in Xander's chest. I should be moving on tomorrow. I've already imposed on your hospitality longer than intended. A flash of disappointment crossed Olivia's face, quickly masked. At least, let me send you with provisions for your journey. It's the least I can do, after all your help. That afternoon, Xander completed the barn repairs and moved on to other tasks around the property, mending fences, clearing brush that had begun to encroach on the garden, and repairing a broken wheel on Olivia's wagon. As he worked, he found himself watching her, noting the grace with which she moved and the quiet determination with which she faced her daily tasks. For her part, Olivia seemed to take comfort in having another presence on the homestead. She hummed as she worked in the kitchen, and once Xander caught her laughing when a young rabbit darted across the yard, startling her chickens into a frenzy. That evening, they walked together to the stream that bordered her property. The setting sun painted the water with gold and crimson, and a gentle breeze carried the scent of wildflowers. I used to come here with Thomas in the evenings, Olivia said, seating herself on a flat rock at the water's edge. He would talk about all the things we'd built together over the years. A bigger house, a proper workshop, maybe even a mill someday. She sighed. Dreams die hard. Xander sat beside her, careful to maintain a respectful distance. New dreams can grow in their place. She turned to him, her eyes reflecting the sunset. Is that what happened for you, after your wife and daughter? He considered this, watching the water flow over smooth stones. Not right away. For years I didn't want new dreams. Felt like a betrayal somehow. He paused. But lately, I've been thinking it might be time to put down roots again. Find a place where I could build something, like your Thomas did. What would you build? She asked softly. A ranch, maybe? Somewhere with good water and enough land for cattle. He smiled slightly. Sounds simple when I say it aloud. The best dreams often are, Olivia replied. After a moment, she added, I've been thinking of selling this place. Too many memories, and I'm not sure I can maintain it alone. The admission seemed to surprise her as much as it did Xander. Where would you go? He asked. I don't know. Back east, perhaps, though there's nothing for me there now. My parents are gone, and my only sister is in California. She looked around at the homestead, visible through the trees. Yet the thought of leaving feels like abandoning Thomas all over again. He wouldn't want you to live in the shadow of grief forever, Xander said gently. Olivia's eyes filled with tears. How do you know when it's time to let go? I don't think you ever really let go, he answered honestly. You just learn to carry it differently. And someday, you realize you've been breathing again, without having to remind yourself how. As darkness fell, they walked back to the house in companionable silence. At the porch steps, Olivia paused, turning to face Xander in the silver light of the rising moon. Would you... She began, then faltered, uncharacteristically hesitant. Would you consider staying another day or two? The wagon still needs work, and I have more repairs than I realized. Xander knew he should refuse. The Caldwell job was waiting, and his presence at Olivia's homestead was already causing talk in town. Yet, looking at her in the moonlight, he found himself unable to say the words that would take him away from her. I can stay through the end of the week, he said finally. Caldwell's not expecting me until the 15th. The smile that illuminated her face was worth whatever complications might arise from his decision. "Thank you, Xander." That night, Xander lay awake longer than usual, troubled by feelings he hadn't experienced in years. Olivia Anderson had awakened something in him that he'd thought long dead, a yearning for connection, for the simple joy of sharing moments with someone who understood the weight of loss but refused to be crushed by it. Morning found him already at work on Olivia's wagon, determined to earn his keep during his extended stay. She brought him coffee and biscuits, then set about her own chores, occasionally glancing his way with a small smile that warmed him more than the summer sun. By midday, clouds had gathered on the horizon, promising an afternoon thunderstorm. Xander worked faster, hoping to complete the wagon repairs before the rain began. Olivia had gone into town for supplies, insisting she could manage the errand alone, despite his offer to accompany her. "The gossips have enough to chew on already," she'd said with a wry smile. "No need to feed them more by parading through town together." The first fat raindrops were falling when Xander heard the sound of approaching hooves. Expecting to see Olivia returning, he was surprised to find Sheriff Patterson instead, riding up to the house with a grim expression. "Fairfield," the lawman called, dismounting and tying his horse to the hitching post. "Need a word?" Xander set down his tools, wiping his hands on a rag as he approached. "Sheriff, what brings you out in this weather?" Patterson glanced at the darkening sky. "Storm's just getting started. Won't last long." He fixed Xander with a hard stare. "Got a telegram from Arizona this morning. Says you're wanted for questioning in connection with those deaths at the Silverado mine." Xander's expression remained neutral, though his mind raced. "That matter was settled before I left. Self-defense, clear as day." "Maybe so," Patterson conceded. "But apparently new evidence has surfaced. They're asking me to detain you until a marshal can come fetch you back to Arizona." "What new evidence?" Xander demanded, tension coiling through his body. "Telegram didn't say. Just asked that I hold you." The sheriff's hand rested meaningfully on his holstered pistol. "Now, I'd prefer to do this peacefully, out of respect for the widow." Xander considered his options, none of them good. He could resist, potentially leading to violence on Olivia's property. He could flee, confirming his guilt in Patterson's eyes. Or he could comply, trusting that the truth would eventually prevail, though frontier justice was notoriously unpredictable. Before he could respond, they heard the rattle of Olivia's buggy returning from town. She pulled up short at the sight of the sheriff, her expression instantly wary. "Sheriff Patterson," she acknowledged, climbing down from the buggy. "Is something wrong?" Patterson tipped his hat to her. "Mrs. Anderson, I'm afraid I need to take Mr. Fairfield into custody. There's been a request from authorities in Arizona." Olivia's face paled, but her voice remained steady. "On what charges?" "Just questioning for now, madam," Patterson replied, though his tone suggested he expected more serious charges to follow. Olivia turned to Xander, her eyes searching his. "Is this about what you told me, the mining dispute?" He nodded. "Apparently there's new evidence, though the sheriff doesn't know what it might be." A determined expression settled over Olivia's features. "Sheriff, surely Mr. Fairfield can give his word to appear at your office tomorrow morning. He's been helping me with essential repairs, and with this storm coming." Patterson shook his head. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Anderson. My duty is clear." "Then I'll come with him," she declared, already moving toward the house. "Let me gather a few things." "That won't be necessary," Patterson began, but Olivia cut him off with a look that brooked no argument. "I'll be just a moment," she said firmly, disappearing inside. Left alone with the sheriff, Xander spoke quietly. "I give you my word I won't try to escape. There's no need to worry Mrs. Anderson further." Patterson studied him, then nodded slightly. "I've heard you're a man who keeps his word, Fairfield. See that you do." Olivia emerged from the house with a small bag and a determined expression. The rain was falling steadily now, and thunder rumbled in the distance as they made their way to town. Xander riding beside the sheriff while Olivia followed in her buggy. The Willow Creek Jail was a small building attached to the sheriff's office, containing just 2 cells with iron bars. Patterson led Xander inside, locking him in the first cell while Olivia watched, her face tight with concern. "I'll send that telegram to Arizona right away," Patterson told them. Should hear back within a day or two about when they'll send someone for you. After the sheriff left to send his message, Olivia approached the cell, her hands gripping the iron bars. This is absurd. You were defending yourself and your employer. The mining company has influence, Xander explained grimly. Money buys witnesses and evidence when needed. Then we'll need to fight back, she said, her voice low and determined. I may be just a widow, but I'm not without resources. Thomas left me more than just the homestead. Xander moved closer to the bars, his hands covering hers. Olivia, this isn't your fight. I appreciate your concern, but it became my fight when you defended me at the cemetery, she interrupted. When you repaired my barn and fixed my wagon and made me feel less alone for the first time since Thomas died. The intensity in her eyes stirred something deep within him, a hope he'd thought long extinguished. Before he could respond, the door opened and Sheriff Patterson returned, accompanied by Elmer Perkins and two other men Xander recognized from town. Mrs. Anderson, Patterson said, perhaps you should return home. The storm's getting worse, and it's not proper for a lady to be in the jail. Olivia straightened her spine. I'll leave when I'm satisfied that Mr. Fairfield is being treated fairly. Has the telegraph office confirmed receipt of your message to Arizona? Patterson's expression darkened slightly at her questioning. The lines are down because of the storm. We'll have to wait until morning to send it. Then there's no official hold on Mr. Fairfield yet, she pointed out. You're detaining him based solely on an unconfirmed telegram. Now see here, Mrs. Anderson, Perkins interjected. The sheriff is doing his duty. Just because this drifter charmed his way into your home doesn't mean... Choose your next words with extreme care, Mr. Perkins, Olivia said, her voice like steel. I may be in mourning, but I am not without standing in this community. My husband built half the furniture in your store, as I recall. The shopkeeper subsided, though his expression remained sullen. Sheriff Patterson cleared his throat uncomfortably. Mrs. Anderson, no one is suggesting anything improper, but the telegram was clear. Arizona wants Fairfield held until they can send someone to collect him. And I'm not disputing that, she replied. I'm simply pointing out that until you can confirm the request through official channels, you're holding him on hearsay. At the very least, he should be allowed to post bail. The men exchanged glances, clearly unprepared for Olivia's articulate defense. Xander watched her with growing admiration, seeing beyond the grieving widow to the intelligent, determined woman beneath. There's no bail for federal matters, Patterson finally said, though he sounded less certain. This isn't a federal matter yet, Olivia countered. It's simply a request for cooperation between jurisdictions, which hasn't even been properly received due to the storm. The standoff continued for several minutes until Patterson, clearly uncomfortable with the situation, suggested a compromise. I'll keep Fairfield in custody overnight for everyone's peace of mind. In the morning, if the telegraph lines are restored and the request is confirmed, he stays until Arizona sends someone. If not, he can post bail with the understanding that he remains in town. Olivia glanced at Xander, who nodded slightly. That seems reasonable, she agreed. And I'll be providing Mr. Fairfield's meals during his stay, Sheriff. No offense to your usual arrangements, but I suspect they're somewhat lacking. After extracting a promise from Patterson that Xander would be treated fairly, Olivia reluctantly departed, promising to return in the morning with breakfast. The storm had intensified, rain lashing against the windows as thunder crashed overhead. Left alone in his cell, Xander stretched out on the narrow cot, his thoughts churning. The new evidence was almost certainly fabricated away for the mining company to eliminate a troublesome opponent. If he was taken back to Arizona, he might never get a fair hearing. Yet running would only confirm his supposed guilt and put Olivia in an impossible position. She had already risked her reputation by taking his side against the town's leading citizens. The thought of her facing their judgment alone made his chest tighten with an unfamiliar protectiveness. Morning brought clear skies, and Olivia, as promised, carrying a basket laden with food. Sheriff Patterson allowed her to serve Xander breakfast, though he watched them closely from his desk. The telegraph lines are still down, she murmured as she passed Xander a plate through the bars. Trees fell across them during the storm. It could be days before they were repaired. Hope flickered in Xander's chest. That buys us time, at least. Olivia nodded, keeping her voice low. I've been thinking, The mining company would need connections to manipulate the law from such a distance. Do you know anyone who might help us discover who's behind this? Xander considered this. There's a lawyer in Denver who helped with the original case, a man named Harrison Wells. If anyone would know what's happening, it's him. Denver's only a day's ride from here, Olivia said thoughtfully. I could go. No, Xander interrupted firmly. It's too dangerous. If the mining company is willing to fabricate evidence against me, they wouldn't hesitate to hurt someone trying to help me. Olivia's eyes flashed with determination. I'm not asking permission, Xander. I'm simply informing you of my plan. Before he could argue further, the jail door opened and Doc Wilson, Willow Creek's elderly physician, entered, followed by Patterson. Mrs. Anderson, the doctor greeted her with surprise. I didn't expect to find you here. I'm ensuring Mr. Fairfield receives proper meals, she replied calmly. What brings you to the jail, doctor? Sheriff asked me to examine the prisoner, Wilson explained, setting his bag on a nearby chair. Standard procedure when holding someone for transport. Xander exchanged a glance with Olivia, both recognizing this for what it was, an attempt to document his condition before any accidents might occur during his journey back to Arizona. I'd like to stay for the examination, Olivia stated, rather than asked. Now, Mrs. Anderson, Patterson began uncomfortably. That wouldn't be proper. I'll stay on this side of the bars, she assured him smoothly. But as Mr. Fairfield's current employer and the person responsible for his presence in Willow Creek, I have an interest in his welfare. Her persistence won out, and she remained while Doc Wilson performed a cursory examination, noting Xander's excellent health and the various scars that testified to his dangerous profession. Throughout the process, Olivia's presence provided a strange comfort to Xander, who had grown accustomed to facing such situations alone. After the doctor departed, Sheriff Patterson approached the cell. Telegraph repair crew should arrive by tomorrow. Once the lines are up, we'll know for sure what Arizona wants. And if they confirm the request, Xander asked, then I'll hold you until they send someone, which could be a week or more. Patterson glanced at Olivia, then back to Xander. Though I'm starting to wonder if this is worth the trouble. Mrs. Anderson seems determined to turn my jail into her personal dining room. A hint of amusement crossed Olivia's face. I assure you, Sheriff, I have no designs on your establishment beyond ensuring Mr. Fairfield's comfort while this misunderstanding is resolved. Patterson snorted. Misunderstanding. That's one way to put it. He turned to leave, then paused. Mrs. Anderson, you can stay another 15 minutes, then I'll have to ask you to go. Got appearances to maintain. When they were relatively alone again, Olivia moved closer to the bars. I'm leaving for Denver this afternoon, she whispered. I've already arranged for Mrs. Tolliver to look after my chickens and milk the cow. Olivia, Xander said urgently, think about what you're doing. If something happened to you because of me, nothing will happen, she insisted. I'll be just another widow with legal questions. No one will connect me to your case unless I choose to reveal it. Seeing the determination in her eyes, Xander realized argument was futile. Instead, he gave her detailed directions to Harrison Wells's office and a message that would ensure the lawyer took her seriously. Be careful, he said as she prepared to leave. Trust no one on the road and stay in reputable boarding houses. I'm not as fragile as I appear, she reminded him with a small smile. I crossed half a continent to marry Thomas. I can manage a trip to Denver. After she left, Xander paced his cell, anxiety gnawing at him. He had faced death many times without flinching, yet the thought of Olivia riding alone to Denver on his behalf filled him with dread. Sometime during their brief acquaintance, her welfare had become vitally important to him. More important, he realized with surprise, than his own. The day passed slowly, punctuated only by Sheriff Patterson's occasional checks and a sparse supper delivered by his deputy. By nightfall, Xander had examined every inch of his cell, identifying its weaknesses should escape become necessary. Yet, he hesitated, knowing that fleeing would only complicate matters for Olivia upon her return. The next morning brought unexpected news. The telegraph repair crew had arrived earlier than anticipated and had already restored service to Willow Creek. Xander woke to find Sheriff Patterson standing outside his cell, a telegram in hand, and a puzzled expression on his face. Strangest thing, Patterson said, passing the paper through the bars. This just came from the marshal's office in Arizona Territory. Xander scanned the telegram, his eyebrows rising in surprise. It stated clearly that no charges were pending against Xander Fairfield, and any previous communication suggesting otherwise was unauthorized and should be disregarded. "Seems there's been a mistake," Patterson continued, unlocking the cell door. "You're free to go, Fairfield." Xander stepped out cautiously, suspecting a trap. "Just like that?" Patterson shrugged. "Can't hold a man when the folks who wanted him say they don't want him anymore. Though I'm mighty curious about what happened between yesterday and today to change their minds." So was Xander, though he had his suspicions. Someone in Arizona had overplayed their hand, and now they were retreating. Whether this was a temporary reprieve or a permanent resolution remained to be seen. "What about Mrs. Anderson?" Patterson asked, as Xander gathered his few possessions. "She seemed quite invested in your situation." "I expect she'll be relieved to hear the misunderstanding has been cleared up," Xander replied carefully, not wanting to reveal Olivia's journey to Denver. Released from jail, Xander's first priority was retrieving his horse and weapons from the town stable, where Patterson had stored them. His second was finding out whether Olivia had indeed left for Denver as planned. At the Anderson homestead, he found Mrs. Tolliver, a kindly older woman from town, tending to the chickens. She confirmed that Olivia had departed the previous afternoon, planning to reach the stagecoach station in Clearwater by evening. "She said she had business in Denver that couldn't wait," Mrs. Tolliver explained, eyeing Xander curiously. "Something about legal matters regarding her husband's estate. Are you the handyman she mentioned?" "Yes, madam," Xander replied, deciding simplicity was best. "Just checking that everything's in order before I move on. Well, she said you might come by, left a letter for you in the house." Mrs. Tolliver produced a key from her apron pocket. "Said I should let you in if you needed anything." Inside, Xander found Olivia's letter on the kitchen table, her elegant handwriting covering a single page. "Xander," it began, "by the time you read this, I'll be on my way to Denver. I know you disapprove, but I cannot stand by while an innocent man faces false charges, especially not a man who showed me kindness when others showed only judgment. I'll return as soon as possible with whatever information Mr. Wells can provide. In the meantime, please consider my home your own. Olivia." The simplicity of her words belied their impact on him. In his years of wandering, no one had fought for him this way, risking their reputation and safety for his sake. The realization stirred emotions long dormant, filling him with an urgent need to ensure her safety. Decision made, Xander gathered supplies for the journey, leaving a note for Mrs. Tolliver explaining that he was following Olivia to Denver on urgent business. By mid-morning, he was on the trail to Clearwater, pushing his horse as fast as was reasonable given the muddy conditions left by the storm. The stagecoach station in Clearwater confirmed what he had feared. Olivia had indeed boarded the Denver-bound stage the previous evening. The next stage wouldn't depart until the following morning, leaving Xander with a choice: wait and fall further behind, or continue on horseback through unfamiliar territory. He chose the latter, purchasing a detailed map from the station manager and setting out immediately. The journey would be grueling, but with luck and good weather, he might reach Denver only a day or two after Olivia. As he rode, Xander contemplated the strange turn his life had taken since hearing Olivia's song in the Willow Creek Cemetery. What had begun as a brief stopover had become something far more complicated and potentially far more meaningful than anything he had experienced in years. The Arizona telegram still puzzled him. Either someone had impersonated the authorities to have him detained, or someone with influence had pressured them to withdraw their request. Either way, he suspected the mining company's involvement, which meant the danger might not be over. 3 days of hard riding brought Xander to Denver, a bustling city that had grown dramatically since his last visit years earlier. Finding Harrison Wells's office proved relatively simple. The lawyer had established a successful practice near the courthouse, his name prominently displayed on a brass plaque outside a handsome brick building. What Xander didn't expect was to find Olivia herself seated in Wells's office, deep in conversation with the lawyer when the secretary showed Xander in. She turned at his entrance, her face registering shock followed swiftly by joy. "Xander!" she exclaimed, rising from her chair. "How are you here? Were you released?" "The charges were dropped," he explained, moving toward her. "A telegram came from Arizona clearing everything up. I was worried about you traveling alone, so I followed." Harrison Wells, a distinguished man in his 50s with shrewd eyes behind wire-rimmed spectacles, observed their reunion with interest. "So, this is the famous Xander Fairfield," he said, extending his hand. "Mrs. Anderson has been most persuasive on your behalf." Xander shook the offered hand. "She shouldn't have had to be. Those charges were fabricated from the start." "Indeed," Wells agreed, gesturing for them both to sit. "And that's precisely what makes this situation intriguing. The Silverado Mining Company rarely admits defeat, yet someone apparently convinced them to withdraw their complaint against you." Olivia leaned forward eagerly. "Mr. Wells was just explaining that to me when you arrived. He believes someone with significant influence intervened." "But who?" Xander asked, puzzled. "I don't have connections in those circles." Wells smiled thinly. "Perhaps not directly, but Mrs. Anderson mentioned you were headed to the Caldwell Ranch in Wyoming when you were detained." "That's right," Xander confirmed. "Samuel Caldwell hired me to deal with rustlers." "Samuel Caldwell," Wells repeated meaningfully. "Whose sister happens to be married to Senator James Holloway of Colorado, the same Senator Holloway who sits on the committee overseeing mining regulations in the territories." Understanding dawned on Xander's face. "You think Caldwell heard about my arrest and asked his brother-in-law to intervene?" "It would explain the remarkably swift resolution," Wells pointed out. "A word from a senator to the right people could certainly make troublesome charges disappear." Olivia looked between the two men, relief evident in her expression. "Then it's truly over? Xander is free to go?" "It appears so," Wells confirmed. "Though I would suggest, Mr. Fairfield, that you continue to your appointment with Mr. Caldwell without delay. Having powerful friends is useful only if you maintain those relationships." After thanking the lawyer for his assistance, Xander and Olivia departed, walking together through Denver's busy streets toward the hotel where she had taken a room. "You shouldn't have come," Xander said quietly, though there was no real reproach in his tone. "It was dangerous. Yet here we are, with the matter resolved and both of us unharmed," she pointed out. "Sometimes risk is necessary, Xander." He couldn't argue with her logic, nor with the results of her intervention. Without her journey to Denver, they might never have discovered the connection that had secured his freedom. At her hotel, a respectable establishment catering to business travelers, they found a quiet corner of the lobby where they could speak privately. "When will you return to Willow Creek?" Xander asked, already dreading their parting. Olivia hesitated, her fingers fidgeting with the cameo at her throat. "I've been thinking about that, about what you said regarding Thomas not wanting me to live in the shadow of grief forever." Xander waited, sensing she had more to say. "Denver has opportunities that Willow Creek lacks," she continued. "Music schools, cultural societies, places where my singing might be appreciated rather than mocked." She met his gaze directly. "I'm considering selling the homestead and starting fresh here." The announcement caught him off guard, stirring both hope and uncertainty. "Are you sure? It's a big decision to make so quickly." "I've been considering it for weeks," she admitted. "Even before you arrived, your presence simply gave me the courage to imagine a different future." Xander absorbed this, aware that his next words could alter both their paths. "And what about Wyoming? The Caldwell Ranch?" "What about it?" she asked, her eyes never leaving his. "I still need to go there," he said carefully, "at least to fulfill my obligation. But after that," he took a deep breath. "After that, I could return to Denver, if you think there might be a reason for me to do so." A slow smile spread across Olivia's face, transforming it with a radiance that caught at Xander's heart. "I think there might be several reasons, Mr. Fairfield." In that moment, surrounded by the bustle of Denver's growth and promise, Xander recognized the opportunity before him, not just for work or stability, but for rebuilding a life he had thought forever lost. A life that might include Olivia Anderson, whose song had reached past his defenses to touch something he had buried alongside Ellie and Emma. "Then I'll return," he promised, reaching for her hand. "As soon as my business with Caldwell is concluded." Olivia's fingers entwined with his, warm and certain. "I'll be waiting, and perhaps practicing my singing without fear of scandalizing the neighbors." Their laughter mingled, drawing curious glances from passers-by, but neither cared. For the first time in years, Both had found something worth more than the approval of strangers, a connection that promised healing for wounds long festering. The following morning, they parted at the stagecoach station, Olivia returning to Willow Creek to arrange the sale of her property while Xander continued north to Wyoming. Their farewell was brief but weighted with promise, sealed with a chaste kiss that hinted at deeper feelings neither was quite ready to name. 6 weeks, Xander said as he mounted his horse. 8 at the most, then I'll meet you in Denver. I'll hold you to that, Mr. Fairfield, Olivia replied with a smile that stayed with him long after she had disappeared from view. The Caldwell Ranch sprawled across a verdant valley in southeastern Wyoming territory, its cattle grazing contentedly on summer-rich grasslands. Samuel Caldwell, a barrel-chested man with a booming voice and shrewd eyes, welcomed Xander warmly despite his delayed arrival. "Heard you had some trouble down in Colorado," Caldwell said as they rode the property boundary on Xander's first day. "Jim Holloway sent word that he'd sorted it out for you." "I'm grateful for the intervention," Xander acknowledged, "though I didn't know the connection existed until after the fact." Caldwell chuckled. "That's how it works out here. Never know when a name or a handshake might save your hide." He gestured toward a distant ridge. "Now, about these rustlers. They've been hitting the North Range, always during the new moon. Professional outfit by my reckoning." The work was exactly as Xander had expected, tracking the rustlers to their hideout, gathering evidence of their operation, and ultimately confronting them with Caldwell's ranch hands as backup. The gang surrendered with minimal resistance when faced with overwhelming force, and within 3 weeks, they were in the territorial marshal's custody awaiting trial. "That was cleaner than I expected," Caldwell admitted as he paid Xander his fee, adding a substantial bonus. "Thought for sure we'd have gunplay." "Most men prefer living to dying," Xander replied simply. "Even outlaws." With his obligation fulfilled, Xander found himself at a crossroads. For the first time in years, he had no next job lined up, no destination calling him onward. There was only the promise he had made to Olivia to return to Denver and explore whatever might be growing between them. The realization was both liberating and terrifying. His life as a drifter had been lonely, but predictable. What awaited him in Denver was unknown, fraught with the possibility of both joy and heartbreak. Yet, as he rode south from the Caldwell Ranch, Xander felt a lightness he hadn't experienced in a decade. The mountains rising before him seemed less a barrier than a gateway, leading him back to Olivia and the chance to build something permanent. Denver had grown even in the weeks of his absence, new construction visible at the city's edges as he approached. Xander made his way directly to the address Olivia had provided, a modest but well-maintained boarding house in a respectable neighborhood, catering primarily to single women working as teachers and clerks. The landlady, a formidable widow named Mrs. Harrington, regarded him suspiciously until he mentioned Olivia's name. "Mrs. Anderson is expecting you," she said, her tone softening slightly. "She's giving a music lesson at the moment, but should return within the hour. You may wait in the parlor." The parlor, with its rigid formality and watchful occupants, was hardly conducive to the reunion Xander had imagined. After 15 uncomfortable minutes under the scrutiny of 2 elderly ladies knitting by the window, he decided to wait outside. Denver's autumn was in full glory, the trees lining the residential streets ablaze with gold and crimson. Xander leaned against a maple tree across from the boarding house, enjoying the play of sunlight through the leaves while keeping watch for Olivia's return. He didn't have to wait long. Within half an hour, he spotted her approaching from the direction of downtown, her steps light and purposeful. She wore a dress of deep blue rather than widow's black, and her hair was arranged more elegantly than he remembered. Even from a distance, the changes were evident, a new confidence in her bearing, a brightness about her that spoke of renewal. She saw him before he could call out, her steps faltering momentarily before quickening. In moments, she stood before him, cheeks flushed and eyes bright with emotion. "You're early," she said, her voice catching slightly. "I didn't expect you for another week." "The rustlers were less troublesome than anticipated," he replied, drinking in the sight of her. "And I found I had reason to hurry back." Her smile was everything he had remembered during their separation. "I'm glad you did. There's so much to tell you." They walked together through the neighborhood, Olivia eagerly sharing news of her new life in Denver. She had sold the homestead to a young couple from Kansas, using part of the proceeds to secure comfortable accommodations and invest the rest. She had found work teaching music to children from prominent families and had joined a choral society that performed regularly at civic events. "And what about you?" she asked as they settled on a bench in a small park. "How was Wyoming?" Xander told her about the Caldwell Ranch and the successful resolution of the rustling problem. What he didn't immediately share was the offer Caldwell had made before his departure, a permanent position as ranch foreman with the opportunity to earn an ownership stake over time. "You seem different," Olivia observed, studying his face. "More at peace somehow." He nodded, acknowledging the truth of her perception. "I've been thinking about the future, about what comes next." "And what have you decided?" she asked softly. Xander turned to face her fully, taking her hands in his. "That depends greatly on you, Olivia." Her eyes widened slightly, but she didn't pull away. "On me? I've spent 10 years drifting from place to place, taking jobs that suited my skills, but never staying long enough to build anything lasting." He paused, gathering courage for words he hadn't spoken in a decade. "Meeting you changed that, made me want something I thought I'd never want again." Olivia's fingers tightened around his. "What is that, Xander?" "A home," he said simply. "A place to belong, a reason to stay rather than reasons to leave." He met her gaze steadily. "I care for you, Olivia, more than I thought possible after Ellie and Emma. If you think there might be a place for me in your new life here in Denver, I'd like to explore that possibility." Tears welled in Olivia's eyes, but her smile was radiant. "I've been hoping you would say something like that. These past weeks building this new life, I've found myself constantly wondering what you would think of each decision, each new discovery." Relief and joy surged through Xander. "Is that a yes?" "It's a beginning," she replied, leaning closer. "A chance for both of us to discover what might grow between us, without the shadows of Willow Creek or Arizona hanging over us." In the dappled sunlight of Denver's autumn afternoon, Xander drew Olivia into his arms, their kiss a promise and a beginning all at once. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time in years, uncertainty felt like possibility rather than danger. Over the weeks that followed, Xander and Olivia built the foundations of a life together. He found work with a local freight company, using his knowledge of frontier trails and his way with horses to secure regular routes. She continued her music teaching, her reputation growing as word spread of her talent and patience with young students. They spent their evenings exploring Denver's growing cultural offerings, concerts at the newly built Opera House, lectures at the library, simple meals at restaurants where Olivia was becoming a recognized face. On Sundays, they often rode into the foothills, finding quiet spots where she would sing for him alone, her voice rising pure and strong against the backdrop of mountain vistas. As Christmas approached, bringing with it Denver's first substantial snowfall, Xander found himself contemplating the small velvet box hidden in his trunk. The ring inside had been his grandmother's, a simple gold band with a modest diamond that had somehow survived his years of wandering, a talisman of a different life he had once thought forever closed to him. He had planned to wait until Christmas Eve to propose, arranging a special dinner at Denver's finest restaurant. But fate, as it often did, had other ideas. A blizzard swept down from the mountains 3 days before Christmas, blanketing the city in 2 feet of snow and bringing all activity to a standstill. Trapped in Mrs. Harrington's boarding house, where Xander had been invited to weather the storm with the residents, they found themselves with unexpected privacy when the other boarders gathered in the kitchen to bake holiday treats. Seated before the parlor fireplace, watching snowflakes dance beyond the frosted windows, Olivia rested her head against Xander's shoulder with a contented sigh. "This reminds me of winters in Willow Creek," she murmured. "Thomas and I would sit just like this, planning for spring plantings and summer projects. Once, the mention of her late husband might have given Xander pause. Now he understood it for what it was: not a comparison, but the sharing of a precious memory with someone she trusted. "Do you miss it?" he asked gently. "The homestead, I mean." Olivia considered this, her fingers absently tracing patterns on his hand. "Sometimes. There was a simplicity to life there that Denver lacks, but I don't regret leaving." She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting the firelight. The past is precious, but it's still the past. I'm more interested in the future now. Something in her expression, in the quiet certainty of her words, made Xander reach for his coat hanging nearby. I had planned to do this differently, he said, retrieving the small box from his pocket. With more ceremony and perhaps better timing. Olivia sat up straighter, her eyes widening as she recognized the significance of the moment. Xander? He knelt before her, the velvet box open in his palm. Olivia Anderson, you brought music back into my life when I thought I would never hear it again. You fought for me when no one else would. You showed me that grief doesn't have to be the end of the story. He took a deep breath. I love you. Will you marry me? Tears spilled down Olivia's cheeks as she looked from the ring to his face. Yes, she whispered, then more strongly. Yes, Xander. I will marry you. As he slipped the ring onto her finger, Olivia began to sing softly, not a hymn of mourning this time, but a gentle love song that filled the room with promise. Xander recognized it as the tune she had sung on her porch that night in Willow Creek, when he had first glimpsed the possibility of healing. That's the sweetest sound I've ever heard, he said, echoing his words from their first meeting. Olivia smiled through her tears. It's for you, for us, for the life we're building. When the blizzard finally released Denver from its grip 3 days later, they emerged from the boarding house as an engaged couple, their news spreading quickly through their growing circle of friends and acquaintances. Mrs. Harrington, despite her initial reservations about Xander, was among the first to offer congratulations, declaring that she had seen it coming from the start. The wedding took place in early spring, when Denver's gardens were just beginning to bloom. It was a small ceremony in a chapel near their new home, a modest but comfortable house they had purchased with their combined savings, located close enough to the city center for Olivia's music students, but with enough space for Xander to keep horses for his freight business. Among the guests were Samuel Caldwell and his wife, who had traveled from Wyoming for the occasion, and surprisingly, Dr. Wilson from Willow Creek, who had maintained correspondence with Olivia after her departure. Even Sheriff Patterson sent a brief but sincere letter of congratulations, acknowledging that he had misjudged both of them. As they exchanged vows before the small gathering, Xander reflected on the unlikely journey that had brought them to this moment from a cemetery in Willow Creek, where a widow's song had pierced his carefully constructed armor, to this chapel in Denver, where they pledged to build a future together. When the minister pronounced them husband and wife, Olivia's smile was radiant with a joy that reflected his own. As they walked back down the aisle together, she leaned close to whisper, I believe Thomas would approve, don't you? Xander squeezed her hand gently. I think he would be glad to know you're singing for joy now, not just in sorrow. Their life together unfolded with the steady rhythm of seasons changing and a city growing around them. Xander's freight business expanded as Denver's importance as a transportation hub increased, eventually allowing him to hire employees and focus on management rather than constant travel. Olivia's reputation as a music teacher flourished, leading to an invitation to join the faculty of a newly established conservatory. 2 years after their wedding, their daughter Emma was born, named for the child Xander had lost, but with eyes that reminded him of Olivia. A son followed 3 years later, Thomas, a tribute to the man whose craftsmanship had created the home where Xander and Olivia had first connected. On warm summer evenings, when the children were asleep and Denver's lights twinkled beneath a vast canopy of stars, they often sat on their porch much as they had at the Anderson homestead years before. Sometimes Olivia would sing, her voice carrying softly into the night, no longer an expression of grief, but a celebration of the life they had built together. Do you ever wonder, she asked on one such evening, as their 10th anniversary approached, what would have happened if you hadn't stopped in Willow Creek that day? If you hadn't heard me singing at the cemetery? Xander considered this, his arm around her shoulders as they watched fireflies rise from their garden. I'd probably still be drifting from job to job, telling myself that was enough, and I might still be there, singing to Thomas's grave and scandalizing the neighbors, she mused. Instead, here we are, he said, gesturing to their home, their life together. Olivia leaned her head against his shoulder, contentment in her sigh. Here we are. And do you know something, Xander? It's better than any song I could ever sing." As if to contradict her, she began to hum softly the same melody he had first heard in the cemetery, but transformed now, the notes carrying hope rather than despair, love rather than loss. Xander closed his eyes, letting the music wash over him, grateful beyond words for the courage of a widow who had continued to sing despite mockery, and for the twist of fate that had allowed him to hear her. In the years that followed, as their children grew and Denver expanded from frontier town to bustling city, they often returned to that moment in Willow Creek, the unexpected intersection of their separate griefs that had ultimately led them to shared joy. It remained a testament to the power of resilience, to the heart's capacity for renewal, and to the enduring magic of a song sung in defiance of despair, heard by the one person who recognized its true beauty. And in their story, passed down through generations of their family, that simple truth remained. Sometimes, in our darkest moments, when we raise our voices despite ridicule and pain, the right person is listening, someone who hears not our brokenness, but the sweetest sound they've ever known.